70,000 years ago, the human population of Earth dropped to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 people. To put that in perspective, there are more people in a single apartment complex in any major city today than there were humans alive on the entire planet. Every person on Earth right now, 8 billion of us, descended from that tiny group. We came within a single catastrophe of never existing at all. And almost nobody knows it happened. The event was called the Toba supervolcano eruption. It occurred on the island of Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia. And it wasn't a volcano in any sense most people understand the word. Toba wasn't an eruption. It was a detonation. Scientists estimate it released approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and debris into the atmosphere, roughly 10,000 times more powerful than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which killed 57 people and flattened forests across 600 square kilometers. Mount St. Helens made international headlines for weeks. Toba didn't flatten forests. It buried continents. And it did it in silence, because there was no one left nearby to hear it. The ash cloud spread across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and large portions of Africa. Geological records show Toba ash layers in India 6 inches deep. 6 inches of ash, covering an entire subcontinent, from a single event. In East Africa, where many of humanity's surviving ancestors were living, ash layers from Toba have been found in sediment cores pulled from ancient lakebeds, a permanent geological scar left by a single afternoon in prehistoric time. The sky across much of the planet went dark. Not for days. For years. Temperatures dropped by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius globally, and significantly more in the regions closest to the eruption. Forests died. The animals that depended on those forests died. The food chains that sustained human populations across vast stretches of Africa and Asia simply collapsed, not gradually, not slowly, but all at once, in a geological instant that stretched across years. Your ancestors had no way to outlast except by surviving them one day at a time. Your ancestors were standing in the middle of it. Think about what that actually means in practical terms. These were not people with emergency food supplies, insulated shelters, or governments coordinating disaster relief. These were small bands of humans, groups of 20, maybe 50 people, living in direct, daily contact with the land around them, dependent on the animals and plants of their immediate environment for every single meal. And then the sky went dark. The temperature dropped. The plants stopped producing. The animals began moving, starving, or dying. And it kept going. Season after season. Year after year. With no way to know when it would end. No way to know if it would end. We know they survived. What we don't fully understand, even now, is how scientists call what followed a genetic bottleneck. When a population is reduced to a very small number of survivors, the genetic diversity of the entire species collapses around those survivors. Every variation, every mutation, every genetic path that wasn't represented in those 1,000 people was simply gone forever. And we can see the evidence of this event in human DNA today. 70,000 years later. We are, as a species, remarkably genetically similar to each other compared to almost any other animal. Chimpanzees, despite existing in far smaller numbers than humans, carry significantly more genetic diversity than we do. Geneticists studying the human genome have identified a sharp compression, a point in our evolutionary history where the genetic variation that should have accumulated across hundreds of thousands of years was suddenly, catastrophically reduced. That compression points directly to Toba. To those 1,000 survivors. To the single thread our species hung from for years in the dark after a mountain tried to erase us, the thread held. But why? This is where conventional history tends to skip past the most important part. Survival narratives about prehistoric humans tend to focus on intelligence, on tools, on fire. And those things mattered. But they don't explain Toba. Because during the volcanic winter that followed Toba, intelligence alone wasn't enough. Tools alone weren't enough. The thing that kept humans alive in the aftermath of the worst catastrophe our species has ever faced wasn't any individual capability. It was what humans did with each other. Researchers studying this period keep arriving at the same conclusion. The survivors weren't the strongest. They weren't the most individually capable. They were the most cooperative. And not cooperative in a passive, comfortable sense, cooperative in a costly, risky, demanding sense. Sharing food with someone who couldn't immediately repay you. Caring for sick or injured group members who were a drain on desperately scarce resources. Making collective decisions that benefited the group even when they cost the individual. These behaviors were not guaranteed. They were not automatic. In conditions of extreme scarcity, every evolutionary pressure pushes toward selfishness. And yet the humans who survived Toba were the ones who pushed back. The ones who shared anyway. The ones who stayed. The archaeological record from this period contains a detail that very few people know about, and it is one of the most remarkable things in all of human history. In sites across Africa dating to the period immediately following the Toba eruption, researchers have found evidence of long-distance exchange networks, ochre, shells, and stone tools moving across hundreds of kilometers between groups that had no permanent contact with each other. Think about what that means. In the immediate aftermath of the worst catastrophe our species had ever experienced, with food scarce and populations decimated, humans were not retreating into isolated survival mode. They were reaching out. They were building networks across distances that would have taken weeks to travel. They were trading with strangers. Not because they had surplus, they almost certainly didn't. But because they understood, in whatever way prehistoric humans understood anything, that the group over the mountain range was not a competitor. It was a lifeline. Connection was survival. Reach was survival. Generosity, even when it cost you, was survival. This is the part that gets me every time. At the darkest moment in human history, with the sky still dark and the ash still falling and the food still running out, humans looked outward instead of inward. And it worked. Because we're here, now consider what gets passed down through 70,000 years of human culture. Not just genes. Behaviors. Impulses. The drive to share resources even under pressure. The refusal to abandon vulnerable group members. The instinct to treat a stranger as a potential ally rather than a default threat. These behaviors were so thoroughly reinforced by the post-Toba survival period that they appear, in some recognizable form, in virtually every human culture ever studied. Anthropologists have yet to find a human society without some version of reciprocal gift-giving. Without some form of collective obligation to care for the sick, the elderly, the injured. Without some ritual of hospitality toward strangers, offering food, offering shelter, offering safety to someone who arrives with nothing. These aren't coincidences. These aren't separate cultural inventions. They are the behavioral fingerprint of the 1,000 people who refused to let the species die. They are what survival looked like, written into culture and passed forward across 70,000 years until it reached you. Here is what that means for right now, in the world you're actually living in. Every time you help someone without calculating whether you'll get something back, you are running a behavioral program that is 70,000 years old. Every time a community assembles after a disaster, not because someone organized it, but because people just showed up, you are watching the same instinct activate that kept humanity alive in the volcanic winter after Toba. Every time sharing feels more natural than hoarding, every time connection feels more urgent than competition, that is not sentiment. That is not naivety. That is evolutionary memory. That is the deepest surviving lesson of the worst thing that ever happened to us. We spend a lot of time in the modern world treating cooperation as a nice idea, something to aspire to, something admirable but not fundamental. Something that works when conditions are comfortable. The history of Toba says something completely different. Cooperation isn't what humans do when things are easy. It's what humans do when things are impossible. It's the behavior that was selected for, reinforced, and passed forward precisely because it worked when nothing else did. When the sky went dark and the food ran out and 1,000 people scattered across a dying planet had to figure out whether to hold on to what they had or share it with whoever was standing next to them, they shared it. In the dark. When there wasn't enough. When there was no guarantee it would matter. When the rational calculation, in any individual sense, pointed toward keeping it for yourself. They shared it anyway. And 70,000 years later, 8 billion descendants of those 1,000 people are here because they did. The world almost ended. Not for the planet didn't notice. But for us. For this particular, improbable experiment in large-brained, slow-reproducing, intensely social primates who somehow decided, in the worst moment their species had ever faced, that the answer was each other. That decision is why you exist. Not strength. Not intelligence. Not individual survival instinct. The decision, repeated across years of darkness by 1,000 people who had every reason to give up and somehow didn't, to share what they had, to reach toward strangers, to stay, that's what humans are made of. 70,000 years later, it still is.